The world woke up on March 1st, 2026, to one of the most explosive military standoffs the modern era has ever seen, a direct confrontation between the United States Navy and the Islamic Republic of Iran, in the middle of an active war zone, with the world's most powerful aircraft carrier squarely in the crosshairs. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, released a formal statement claiming they had fired 4 ballistic missiles directly at the USS Abraham Lincoln, one of the most heavily fortified warships on the planet. The statement didn't just claim it a near miss. The IRGC said those missiles hit. They said the carrier was struck. They warned, in their own words, that the land and sea will increasingly become the graveyard of the terrorist aggressors. The Pentagon's response was swift, sharp, and absolute. U.S. Central Command took to social media with a single word that cut through all the noise: lie. They went further, saying the Lincoln was not hit, the missiles didn't even come close, and that the carrier was continuing to launch aircraft as part of their ongoing campaign against Iran. So who is telling the truth? And why does it matter so much to both sides that their version of events become the accepted reality? To understand what happened on that Sunday morning in the waters of the Arabian Sea, you need to understand everything that led up to it. Because this didn't begin with 4 missiles. It began with decades of hostility, a desperate nuclear negotiation that collapsed at the last moment, and one of the most audacious military operations the United States has carried out since the invasion of Iraq. Let's go back to February 27th, 2026, at 3:38 in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. President Donald Trump, traveling aboard Air Force One en route to Texas, gave the order. The operation had a name: Operation Epic Fury, and the target was the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was not an impulsive decision. In the weeks leading up to the strikes, the United States had assembled what military analysts described as the largest American naval force deployed to the Middle East in decades. 2 aircraft carriers were already positioned in the region: the USS Abraham Lincoln, operating in the Arabian Sea, south of Iran's coastline, and the USS Gerald R. Ford, positioned in the Mediterranean, off the coast of Israel. Accompanying them were 9 guided missile destroyers and 3 frigates. This was not a defensive posture. This was preparation for war. The trigger, according to the White House, was the collapse of nuclear negotiations. On February 27th, just hours before the attack order was given, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed that Iran had concealed highly enriched uranium in an underground facility that had survived all previous strikes. The IAEA concluded they could no longer certify that Iran's nuclear program was, in their words, exclusively peaceful. For the Trump administration, that was the line. Diplomacy had been tried. It had failed. And now, as Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth would later say, it was time to deal with this cancer. Airstrikes on Iran began on February 28th, a Saturday, at approximately 9:45 in the morning, local Iranian time. The targets were specific and strategic: Revolutionary Guard facilities, missile production sites, naval assets, air defense systems, and command centers across multiple cities: Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, and Kermanshah. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, each valued at over $1 billion, were among the first assets deployed, along with Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from U.S. destroyers and F/A-18 Super Hornets flying off the deck of the Abraham Lincoln itself. For the first time in history, U.S. Central Command also deployed what they called Task Force Scorpion Strike, one-way attack drones modeled after Iran's own Shahed drone technology, now being used against the country that originally designed them. Israel launched its own simultaneous operation, calling it Operation Roaring Lion. Israeli jets struck Iranian political and military leadership sites throughout Tehran. And then came the news that shook the entire world. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, a man who had wielded absolute political and religious authority over 85 million people for 37 years, was dead. He was 86 years old. He had ruled since 1989. He had outlasted 4 U.S. presidents who openly wished for his downfall. And on the morning of February 28, 2026, he died in a precision Israeli airstrike on his compound in Tehran. 4 Israeli security officials confirmed the strike to Western media. Iranian state television eventually confirmed his death. Iran declared 40 days of national mourning. Trump posted on Truth Social. He called Khamenei one of the most evil people in history. He said the man had the blood of hundreds, even thousands of Americans on his hands. We are going to destroy their missiles and raze their missile industry to the ground, Trump declared. We are going to annihilate their navy. The statement wasn't just triumphant. It was a warning. Also killed in the initial strikes were Iran's defense minister, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, Ali Shamkhani, a top presidential advisor, and General Mohammad Pakpour, the head of Iran's ground forces. The entire military command structure of the Islamic Republic had, in the space of a single morning, been effectively decapitated. The White House Situation Room was chaired by Vice President J.D. Vance. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard was present. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Energy Secretary Chris Wright were there as well, connected by secure conference call to the Mar-a-Lago Oversight Room, where Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, monitored operations alongside other senior officials. It was a carefully orchestrated operation. Months of intelligence, satellite tracking, CIA coordination with Israeli counterparts, all of it coming together in a single pre-dawn assault. Iran experienced a near-total internet blackout. Communications across Tehran were disrupted. Fires burned in multiple districts of the capital, and when the smoke partially cleared, what was left of Iran's government scrambled to respond. Tehran's response was Operation True Promise 4, a name deliberately chosen to invoke the previous 3 waves of Iranian retaliation that had struck Israel in 2024 and 2025. But this time the scale was different. This time, Iran wasn't just firing at Israel. It was firing at the United States of America directly, and at every American military installation and ally across the entire Gulf region. Missiles and drones rained down on the UAE. The United Arab Emirates intercepted 9 ballistic missiles, 6 cruise missiles, and 148 separate drones in a single engagement. Abu Dhabi and Dubai residents received emergency alerts on their phones, telling them to seek immediate shelter. A drone struck the outer facade of the Burj Al Arab Hotel. Another caused a fire at Jebel Ali Port. Zayed International Airport was targeted. Residents of Abu Dhabi were told to stay away from windows. In Kuwait, Iranian strikes reportedly forced the Ali Al Salim Air Base to cease operations. 3 maritime infrastructure facilities at the Mohammed Al Amat Naval Base were destroyed. In Bahrain, the U.S. Naval Base at Mina Salman was struck with 4 drones. Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura refinery one of the largest oil processing facilities in the world, with a capacity exceeding 500,000 barrels per day, was hit by Iranian drones and temporarily shut down. Saudi Aramco confirmed the shutdown, noting there were no casualties, but the symbolic and economic impact was massive. Iraq saw explosions at the U.S. Victory Base near Baghdad International Airport. Rockets struck areas near Erbil in the Kurdish region. Hezbollah in Lebanon fired into northern Israel for the first time in more than a year, claiming it was retaliation for Khamenei's assassination, calling it an official declaration of renewed hostilities. Lebanon's own prime minister immediately condemned the action and called for Hezbollah to surrender its weapons to the Lebanese state. Iran attempted to close, or at least threaten, the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point through which approximately 20 to 30% of the world's seaborne oil passes. An Iranian statement claimed no ship was allowed to cross without permission. Iranian forces struck an oil tanker they said was illegally attempting to pass. Oman's Maritime Security Center reported 4 people were injured in an attack on a tanker north of Qusay port. Oil markets convulsed. Airlines canceled thousands of flights. More than 14,000 departure and arrival flights across the Middle East were disrupted. Passengers were stranded in terminals from Beirut to Dubai, to Doha to Tel Aviv. 2 people were killed in Abu Dhabi in Iranian retaliatory strikes. Another was killed in Tel Aviv. Iran's own Red Crescent reported 201 Iranians killed in the initial American and Israeli bombardment, with hundreds more wounded. A girls' sports hall in Le Merde was bombed during practice, killing at least 18 civilians, a detail that drew immediate international condemnation. More than 550 people were eventually reported killed in Iran in the strikes, according to Red Crescent figures, including children. This is the context in which, on the morning of March 1st, Iran's IRGC issued the statement that set off a global firestorm. At 7:45 in the 7th formal statement of Operation True Promise 4, the IRGC's Public Relations Office announced that the USS Abraham Lincoln had been successfully struck by 4 ballistic missiles. The statement was carried by Iranian state media, IRNA, Press TV, Tasnim news agency, and immediately spread across social media worldwide. Iran framed it as proof that the world's most powerful navy was not invincible, that American technology had failed, that the Ayatollah's death would be avenged, that the seas would become graveyards. Within hours, videos began circulating on TikTok and X, formerly Twitter, purporting to show the carrier on fire, listing burning in the Gulf. The clips were dramatic, visceral, terrifying, and completely fake. One video was traced back to a post made during the 12-day war between Israel and Iran in June 2025. Another appeared to be footage generated by the Arma 3 military simulation video game. Fact-checkers at PolitiFact, Leaked Stories, and other organizations rapidly debunked the footage. The ships in the videos had shapes inconsistent with the Lincoln's actual profile. The deck markings didn't match. There was no debris field consistent with an actual warship strike. U.S. Central Command didn't wait for the debunks to catch up with the disinformation. They moved immediately and aggressively. CENTCOM posted in capital letters, Iran's IRGC claims to have struck USS Abraham Lincoln with ballistic missiles. Lie. The Lincoln was not hit. The missiles launched didn't even come close. And then, critically, they posted video actual time-stamped footage of the USS Abraham Lincoln still actively operating, FA-18 Super Hornets landing and taking off from her flight deck on the morning of March 1st, 2026. The ship wasn't sinking. It wasn't on fire. It was launching combat aircraft. Open source intelligence analysts and military tracking platforms confirmed what CENTCOM was saying. The Abraham Lincoln and its carrier strike group were operating in the wider waters of the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman, positioned deliberately far enough from Iran's coastline to maximize radar acquisition time and to give the ship's layered defense systems the maximum possible space to engage incoming threats at distance. And here is where this story becomes genuinely important to understand, not just as a headline, but as a strategic question. Could Iran, in theory, actually hit a U.S. aircraft carrier? And if they tried and missed, which CENTCOM says happened? What does that tell us about the state of this conflict? The U.S. Abraham Lincoln is a Nimitz-class supercarrier. She is approximately 332 meters long, just over 1,000 feet. She displaces more than 100,000 tons of water. She carries a crew of approximately 3,000 sailors and aviators. She is, by any standard, one of the hardest targets to hide in the world, and she is also one of the hardest targets to kill. The Lincoln does not operate alone. She is the centerpiece of a carrier strike group that includes multiple Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, each equipped with the Aegis combat system, one of the most sophisticated naval air defense architectures ever built. Aegis can simultaneously track hundreds of aerial threats, from ballistic missiles to cruise missiles to drones, and engage them at extended ranges with SM-2, SM-3, and SM-6 interceptors. The destroyers that sail with the Lincoln can carry up to 96 Tomahawk missiles each, and their Aegis systems are specifically designed and tested to defeat the kind of ballistic missile threats Iran possesses. Iran's ballistic missile arsenal is real and should not be dismissed. Missiles like the Shahab-3, the Fateh 1 and 10, the Zulfiqar, and the more advanced Fateh series, including the hypersonic Fateh-2, which Iran claims can maneuver to evade standard air defense systems, represent a genuine threat to static targets, to bases, to cities. But hitting a moving warship surrounded by a layered air defense bubble, with E-2 Hawkeye early warning aircraft operating overhead, is a categorically different proposition from hitting a building in Tel Aviv. Military analysts who spoke about the incident following CENTCOM's denial pointed to the operational deployment of the Lincoln in the broader Arabian Sea, not the narrow Persian Gulf, where Iran's anti-ship capabilities would be maximized by geography. The Lincoln strike group had been deliberately positioned to give the Aegis systems room to work. By the time any Iranian ballistic missile covered the distance from launch point to the carrier's location, it would have been tracked from the moment it left the ground and engaged multiple times over. The broader strategic question that hangs over all of this is the one that the Pentagon, the White House, the intelligence community, and military historians will be grappling with long after the smoke clears, if and when it does. What does America do with a decapitated Iran? The supreme leader is dead. The top military and security apparatus has been dismantled, but the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, with its hundreds of thousands of members, its embedded economic interests, its proxy networks across Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Gaza, still exists. The IRGC does not answer to a president. It answers to the Supreme Leader's office. With that office in emergency transition, With an interim council scrambling for legitimacy, the IRGC is, paradoxically, now acting with more autonomy than at any point in recent decades. That is why the missiles kept flying even after Khamenei was dead. That is why the IRGC kept issuing statements, wave after wave, ninth wave, 10th wave, Khyber missiles opening what it called massive gates of fire, because the IRGC is not simply a military force. It is an ideological institution. It exists to perpetuate the revolution, and the revolution in IRGC doctrine does not end because its leader is gone. If anything, that leader's death becomes the fuel. The United States now faces a question it has never had to answer in quite this form before. What do you do when you've successfully destroyed the political and military leadership of a hostile state, but that state has enough institutional depth, ideological commitment, and dispersed capacity to keep fighting in the absence of centralized command? The answer, as of March 4th, 2026, remains dangerously unclear. What is clear is this: the USS Abraham Lincoln, a 100,000-ton testament to American naval power operating in the Arabian Sea with thousands of sailors aboard, was the target of one of the most audacious claims Iran has made in this conflict. The IRGC said 4 ballistic missiles found their mark. The Pentagon said that was a lie. The evidence, overwhelming and consistent, supports the Pentagon's position. The ship was not hit. Its defenses held, but 3 Americans are dead. 5 more are fighting for their lives in military hospitals. 6 American service members have lost their lives in total in the early days of this war. Iran has launched over 10 waves of retaliatory strikes across the wider Gulf region. The Strait of Hormuz, through which the global oil economy breathes, has been threatened. Gulf states are under missile fire. Airlines have been grounded across an entire region. Civilians on multiple sides of this conflict are caught in a storm they did not create and cannot escape. The question of whether 4 missiles struck a carrier in the Arabian Sea on March 1st, 2026 will continue to be debated, fact-checked, and relitigated in the information spaces of a fragmented global media landscape. Some people will believe the IRGC, some will believe CENTCOM, and the evidence will mean less to both camps than which narrative fits the story they already believe about American power, Iranian defiance, and what justice looks like in a region that has known almost none of it for generations. What cannot be debated, what is recorded, confirmed, and documented, is that the United States and Iran are now in a direct military confrontation, the first of its kind in the history of the 2 countries' conflict, that the supreme leader of Iran is dead, that Americans have died in response, that the Gulf is on fire, and that whatever comes next, in the days, weeks, and months ahead, the world will not look the same on the other side of it.